Okay, so there's this huge fraud unraveling in Minnesota. Tim Walz is getting dragged into it, and the New York Times is now saying that the Somali community is like responsible for it. So I thought it would be important that we look at this and like understand what is even going on with the Somali community in America. How did they get here? How is it that $9 billion in Medicaid fraud is happening in Minnesota? It looks like $250 million in this food program for low-income kids was stolen at least. From what I understand, this might end up being one of the largest financial fraud cases in U.S. history, and it gets even spicier because some of the money might be making it to this group Al-Shabaab, which is this group that like we're currently in conflict with. So I thought it was worth asking, like, how did Minnesota become a hub for Somali immigrants? What is this? So Somalia is here on the east coast of Africa, and then it's important that their coastline here is on this like trade route, which is where a lot of the goods from this area basically pass into the world. That's going to come back because here's this guy, Mohammed Saeed Barre. He was the military dictator of Somalia for like a lot of the 70s and 80s. And Jimmy Carter wanted that trade route to be in US control. So in 78, he sends this high-ranking State Department person to go talk about giving money to this guy, Barre. And from what I understand, we do. And then in 81, the Carter administration basically hands this whole program off to Ronald Reagan, and early on in his presidency, he gives $40 million to Somalia. So this is kind of where like the roots of a lot of the Somali relationship we have in the US come from. And so like here is Ilhan Omar, who is a current House of Representatives rep from Minnesota of Somali descent. She was born in Somalia. And like this is her dad, Nur Omar Mohammed, and he's listed on Google as a teacher, but he was actually a colonel in the Somalia army under this guy, Saeed Barre. And they said that his teacher stuff came because he was like an army trainer maybe. Anyway, this whole concept of like the clan is gonna come back. So anyway, in the late 80s, this dude who we're supporting gets crazy nasty and starts doing some really bad stuff. There's even a document found where dude is literally saying, I'm gonna do this. And so all these people, including us, we stopped supporting homie. And in 1991, he is basically kicked out of office because he doesn't have support of all these people anymore. And Somalia goes into chaos. And because her dad was in league with Saeed Barre, her family flees to a refugee camp in Kenya. All right, now on the US side of things, we kind of have this vibe of like, if we've worked with you in the past, then a lot of times we help you resettle in the US. So we start spinning up these programs where the State Department is providing people with money for each refugee that they place. So for example, this is I got from one refugee service provider in Minnesota. So they say that DHS's Resettlement Programs Office receives approximately $5 million in federal funds to support resettlements in the Minnesota communities. I guess that's in a year. And so I looked up the big one that I'd heard about, which is a part of the Lutheran Church, Lutheran Social Services. So they say that they just received a payment of $4 million in March of this year, and that was just part of what they were owed. So basically, there's a lot of money flowing from the federal government to these NGOs to literally get paid per refugee that they resettle. And I don't know if that's continued after Donald Trump has changed these policies, probably not. But getting back to the whole Somali thing, so Somalis follow this Islamic tradition, which allows men to marry up to 4 wives, especially if they can afford it. And importantly, bigamy, which is basically the crime of having more than one wife, is illegal in Minnesota. So it seems like what happens is there's a lot of men who are legally married to one woman, but they have other women who they are religiously or culturally married to. But it is also important that cohabit under Minnesota law, bigamy laws, say that it's defined as living together under the representation or appearance of being married. So it seems like if a guy is like being culturally married to 3 women who he is not legally married to, under Minnesota law, strictly, that does seem illegal. And now here's where it gets a little spicy, because there are all these welfare programs in Minnesota, many of them that are tied into federal welfare programs like food assistance and health assistance, and single mothers get a lot of welfare support. In fact, 81% of Somali households are on some form of welfare, whereas 21% of the native households are. And I think it's important to point out, just in my research, that this was a pattern in other places as well. So for example, this is an article from Finland, which shows that 46% of women with Somali backgrounds in Finland are single parents and just 18% of mainstream Finnish women. So I mean, being real about it, there's just no way around it. There's a culture that they are doing in places like Minnesota where there is a large welfare state. And being real about it, in my research, it seems like, these folks know a little bit about these programs. I'm sure they all talk. I mean, we got to be reasonable people. They're, going to talk about this stuff. And so one thing that I found is that there are kind of known mechanisms that they do to basically execute the fraud, like owning grocery stores. Because grocery stores are things where like you can actually buy inventory sometimes with, the food benefits parts that come into you or your wives, for example, and then you can use that as inventory, or you can just use it to launder money. A lot of times there's these relationships with like foreign companies. So basically, you'll make money in this one way and then you'll have a deal with this other company that's foreign, or so there's all these like consulting companies that they kind of do to basically launder the money. It's called trade-based money laundering. And of course, when they have a lot of money, they're sending remittances, which means they're sending money back to their friends and family. And the problem is that the remittances are known to be siphoned or taxed by the terrorist group Al-Shabaab. Okay, now importantly, I circled this because this is an NBC affiliate in Seattle, Washington. So not the most conservative place in the world. And in 2015, they reported they started to see something shocking. And now this article itself is from 2016, you're gonna see right there. So this is way before all this stuff broke. And they were seeing that in the Seattle airport, people were carrying large amounts of cash and it was destined for recipients in countries like Somalia. That's because a lot of these remittances are being made through this program called a hawala. It's a remittance system that I gather is kind of informal and goes outside the official banking networks, which might involve doing things like carrying large amounts of cash through the airport, destined for Somalia. And it looks like it's known to fund the arms trade. So what do you think we do about it?